And so that's the reason why we're here tonight to start Health and Wellness Mondays in order to help people understand that they can learn how to heal their bodies through science and not through medicine, but through science. And these are two different spectrums at work and at hand. And one is science and the other is medicine. Science is 20 years ahead of medicine, and you need to know that if you're going to the doctor. The doctor will treat you for symptoms, and science will help you heal your body so you can heal your cognition.
Welcome, everybody. Back here today for another episode of Health and Wellness Mondays with our amazing educator, Mr. Alfred White. We want to thank everybody for tuning in for another moment of fellowship as we create a culture that we continue to learn together. Especially through the power of Federal Black Collective, creating this platform, doing the great things that they're doing in the community, and making sure that we have these avenues and these platforms that are able to connect, minorities with culture, with education in a manner that makes sense. So with that being said, I'd like our wonderful educator, Mr. Alfred White, before we get started, to go ahead and once again kind of reintroduce yourself for people who are just getting here to episode number 3. Kind of give a brief background of who you are and what your mission is when it comes to doing this type of work.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alfred White, and I'm the founder of the League of Extraordinary People. And after experiencing nearly 38 years of homelessness and swallowing a quarter ounce of crack cocaine back in 2004, only 9 days after being released from prison and nearly dying, I went to school and got my master's degree in Christian ministry and Christian counseling. And this was after spending about almost 2 years in Seattle's Union Gospel Missions behavior modification treatment program. And so I went on from there to get my master's. And in the last 3 years, in 2018, I contracted liver cancer and was told that I needed a liver transplant. And that's when I gathered up all my energy and started researching healing programs and healing techniques. And I ran across Veronique Mead with the Chronic Illnesses and Trauma Studies Institute. And I followed her healing program in actuality, and that's what led me to create the League of Extraordinary People. And it's for those who grew up experiencing adverse childhood experiences in their home and adverse babyhood experiences that have compromised our bodies to become susceptible to chronic illness and diseases like liver cancer, where people need liver transplants and kidney transplants and lung transplants and heart transplants. So toxic stress and trauma and adversity actually impacts our physiology more than it impacts our psychology. And so that's the reason why we're here tonight to start Health and Wellness Mondays in order to help people understand that they can learn how to heal their bodies through science and not through medicine, but through science. And these are two different spectrums at work and at hand. And one is science and the other is medicine. Science is 20 years ahead of medicine, and you need to know that if you're going to the doctor. The doctor will treat you for symptoms, and science will help you heal your body so you can heal your cognition.
Absolutely.
That's all I have for right now, Dre.
Excellent. Yes. With that being said, I want to make sure that I point out that, what's important about the education that you're presenting to the people is the fact that you're not only qualified, certified to do this work, but you're also, a person who has experience, who has life experience to go along with, you know, just telling somebody, hey, you need to do this better for your body because this will happen. Reason why is because I can show you, myself, I can show you an example of why you should take better care of your body. And as we know, there's no greater teacher than experience, in that realm, especially when it comes to minorities taking ownership of their health care. I really feel like, it needs to be more of a regimen than kind of an afterthought, like, hey, I need to eat healthy. No, it needs to be a routine. It needs to be something implemented, into your everyday life, such as, taking, blood pressure medicine or taking, anxiety medicine. You need to be taking your health into that same kind of, consideration, in that same kind of serious light. So to get started today, what you've instructed on this.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, sure, sir. Go ahead.
We've been hoodwinked. In actuality, you guys, it happened during our childhood, and it's from the three realms of ACEs. And so the domestication and the dream of the planet, if it wasn't so oppressive on the people in those three realms, then we wouldn't have the problems with our bodies. And so in actuality, there's nothing wrong with our cognition. It's just that the system is so oppressive that it's what's causing our behavioral health problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that being said, you've instructed a video for our classroom today to receive. I want everybody to tap into this video that we want to share with you guys. And after that, if the audience has any questions, please feel free to join in on the conversation.
Yeah.
What do we want for our children? What's our goal? Our goal is to have productive citizens that are going to be part of thriving communities. So how do we get from here to there?
As we grow up and as we move into becoming functioning members of society, our mental health is an important part of how we perform our responsibilities as adults. Mental health can't be separated out from cognitive development and language development and kind of social competence. And they all have their roots early on in either a very sturdy or a weak foundation.
We certainly know that infants and very young children can exhibit behaviors, emotional behaviors, motor behaviors, which are predictive in certain cases of subsequent mental illness.
What are the early signs of mental health problems?
I think that when people look at children and think about mental health problems, that they have in mind often is the kinds of mental health problems that we see in adults. They're looking to see the equivalent of a depressed adult in a child or the equivalent of a schizophrenic adult in a child. And I think that because of the nature of development, that when children have mental health problems, they just look different.
Some of the early signs of greater risk for mental health problems are usually not called mental health problems by people. They're usually called, things like behavior problems or a child who has difficulty controlling his emotions. Some of these may be early signs of what might be a mental health problem later, and some of which may be just differences among perfectly healthy children.
So what does good mental health look like in a child?
Good mental health looks like a child who's curious and interested in the world and wants to learn and can sit and reflect at times about what's going on. It's the ability to experience love, affection, emotions, get upset when things are upsetting, and bring yourself back into levelness without needing intense intervention.
How do mental health impairments develop in early childhood?
21st century science at the molecular level is very clear that all aspects of brain function are the result of an interaction between genetics and experience. Mental illness, as most people think about it, has a very heavy genetic component. Mental health, behavior, personality also has a genetic component, but it's much more malleable in the face of environmental influences.
Genes and experiences, as far as nature is concerned, are just different ways of setting up operating systems, brain systems, neurons.
What happens when a child experiences what we call toxic stress, severe experiences that can be damaging to its developing architecture? Those toxic experiences essentially create this unstable environment, this unstable foundation.
If sound mental health provides a foundation of stability for a child's development, mental health problems can be thought of like a wobbly table. With a child or a table, there may be many reasons for instability. Identifying which factor is causing instability is the first step towards solving the problem. So how do we restore stability to a child's mental health?
But we can detect the early signs of instability. Recognizing what these signs are provides the child with the opportunity then to be placed with healthcare professionals who are trained to develop a more balanced set of skills on the emotional control side.
The prescription is to provide support for parents and in that environment in order to reduce conflict. And that in turn will lead to a reduction in dysregulated behavior in the infant and young child.
Most potential mental health problems will not become mental health problems if we respond to them early. Providing the right kinds of supports and intervention early on will reduce the extent to which this will be a potentially more serious problem later.
That was kind of deep there, huh?
There's a lot to grasp from that video.
The foundations of a successful society rest on the health and competence of its population.
Stop that. And with that being said, it's something that I kind of want to have a conversation with you about as we educate and we move into the educational portion of trauma, and we begin to break down what that is as far as how it affects us and some of the levels that it affects us on. So what I just got from that video, personally, it sounds a lot like what we do with, various tech companies. We consult, and we go into the company, we take an analysis, we basically take a look around, and we figure out what's wrong. And we talk about a lot of preventative work, preventative, measures in order to, keep problems from happening. And, being a father with Black children raised in a Black household, I lost that, when I first became a new father. Was I got to do everything right. I got to raise my son this way. I got to make sure that I'm treating him this way. I got to make sure that I'm feeding him this way, this, that, and the third. But I wasn't paying attention to the environment around him, which is just as, detrimental to the health of a child, along with just purely just raising him. If you're raising a child in chaos, then that child is only going to see and know what? Chaos. No matter how well you treat him, your home, your own mental stability has to be, intact in order for you to be effective in, that journey of being a parent and trying to raise that child. So that's what I got from that video. Is it's just as imperative, to, at work, when you worry about, what job you're going to take. Work environment is one of the most important, if not at the top of your list. You always want to work where you're wanted, where you felt you're of value, where you felt you're of service. I don't see any different from, you know, kids being in the household. They're going to want to be in an environment where they're wanted. They're going to want to be in an environment where they're valued. And that's a part of parenting that I believe that I'm not going to talk about Black households. I'm going to talk about my own. As far as I want to make sure that I'm taking more accountability over when it comes to, you know, these adverse childhood experiences, because, you know, if I'm not checking that, then that's a part of all my kids' mental health that will go, you know, in a direction that I don't want it to go.
So that's that. Let me share something with you, because this is deep. Because what we're talking about here is measurement. And when you go into a new tech company, you go in there and research the environment. So actually, ACEs, the ACE study, is a study of population health. And so ACEs are not our destiny. And that's only if we understand this as a study of our population's health. And so knowing the prevalence of ACEs in a larger population reliably predicts the risk for many kinds of health and behavior problems for that population as a whole. And it doesn't just mean the Black population, it means all populations. ACE scores are a good proxy measure of the dose of toxic stress experienced during development. So that means during the child while in the mother's womb, and then actually in the first 3 years. And so it says, while ACEs are not only the only kinds of stress that shape our neurodevelopment, the list of 10 categories of ACEs, of adverse experiences, provide a solid indicator of toxic stress that children experience. And the toxic stress that children experience is through communication. If you're not there, right there and attentive to your child's needs, and that means that's correlating with their facial expressions. And when they make an expression that you serve, when they serve that you return, then you're not helping them form the neural connections that they need in order to be able to sustain themselves later on in life. And so when that neural activity is not present and that wiring grid is not laid down, so therefore what isn't used is just atrophied, it just goes away. And so that's the reason why neuroplasticity is so important in changing our minds and changing our bodies. And they say some people have expressed a sense of hopelessness or frustration when they first learn about the adverse childhood experiences study and see the ACE pyramid culminating in early death. It is incredibly important to remember that an ACE history is not predictive. Knowing someone's ACE score tells us nothing about that person's individual health, risks, or capacity for resilience. To know about the impact of an individual person's ACE score, we need to ask them. And so that's how you develop resilience in your life, and what's your capacity. And so how do you create resilience is how well you bounce back after adversity. To know about the impact of individual person's ACE score, we need to ask them within the context of a safe relationship within their home or within their parents, or just have an opportunity to talk about ACEs and how it has impacted their lives, so they can develop compassion about themselves. Because the worst person in the room is actually ourselves. We're too critical of ourselves because of the way we was raised. And so our domestication and the dream of the planet is coming together against us. And when our parents are underneath so much stress and stressors in life from the community, from the household, and from the environment, that it impacts them in ways that they don't even know that it impacts them, because everybody keeps forgetting that we're an organism and we operate from cells. Does that make sense to you?
That makes a lot of sense. What you're essentially doing is and what I want to do is I want to pull back for people like me that listen slow. What you just broke down in theory is the science of trauma, and you know, really the details of how to identify it through ACE and measure it, ways to measure it, and tools to measure it through the ACE, basically the program. Is that what you're saying?
So you're not knowing how to socially interact with your children.
Okay.
in which yourself, that's going to be edifying. Because here's the deal: is that it was developed through white body culture. And that's the underlay for the overplay for all the problems that we have, because we have one culture depicting culture of a multicultural country. And so go ahead.
So let's start with trauma. Let's start with, because people, not people, we'll say, I'd say the word trauma gets used a lot in our society. Oh, that's trauma. That's trauma. That's trauma. Let's really talk about, like we started, the science of the word. I really believe trauma can affect different individuals or groups in different ways. Two people can be exposed to the same events or series of events, but interpret these events vastly different ways, regardless of the severity or the type of trauma. People, the resilience that people have towards trauma is different. Not everybody can be measured the same on that level. So with that being said, I want you to break down how trauma affects our social groups in different ways. Starting with our individual groups, like describe what individual trauma is.
Sure. So let me start out with what is trauma. There are many ways to describe and categorize trauma. Ultimately, it's the emotional and physical response to experiencing an event or witnessing an event that is dangerous, frightening, or life-threatening. Okay? Trauma can affect different individuals or groups in different ways. Two people may be exposed to the same event or series of events, but interpret these events in vastly different ways. Regardless of the severity, the type of trauma, the immediate or long-term effects of the trauma can be met with resilience or the ability to overcome the circumstances and meet new challenges with fortitude. But if you grew up in an environment where nobody's fighting and nobody knows what resilience is, nobody knows the definition of resilience, well, you're not even going to have any resilient tools, because ain't nobody ever even talked about resilience. Or if they did talk about resilience, it was in a different terminology that you couldn't gravitate to because nobody around you. Birds of a feather flock together. So it said trauma affects different individual groups in different ways. Individual trauma is a singular event that occurs to one person. Examples are like experiencing assault or being severely injured in a car accident. And then community trauma. Community trauma is trauma that affects our community or culture. Examples: a neighborhood experiencing gang-related violence or surviving a school shooting. And there's group trauma, a traumatic experience shared by a specific group. There's mass trauma, or traumas or disasters that affect large numbers of individuals, either directly or indirectly. So it could have been just like the group trauma. I experienced that on my way to school one year going to Beacon Hill when they had an earthquake. And so we was outside looking at the concrete rolling like we was down at Puget Sound or Lake Washington. And so that was a group trauma. It was a group experience.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of give an example of that group trauma combined with re-traumatization. For the past few years, Black people, minorities, have been witnessing the unarmed shootings of Black men and women and children, really on repeat. When a Black person picks up social media and they see a clip of somebody who looks like them being gunned down over and over and over, and it seems like everywhere you turn, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on whatever they use out there, that the racist website. It's on every single avenue that you turn. I really believe that minorities, Black people specifically, experience a level of unsaid trauma when that happens, and it comes like waves. And what that does to us as a society is it definitely tells us that our lives are devalued on a broader scale. And when you show that over and over and over and over and over to a society, how do you expect that society to, in turn react to that type of treatment? I don't really think that we're understanding the level of trauma that we're receiving every single day on a new level, based off social media. Because
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
so can I explain something to you?
Sure.
We keep talking about these terms, trauma. We keep talking about these terms, resiliency. We keep talking about adverse childhood experiences and individual, community, trauma, and all this stuff. But what we're not even talking about, and what we're not even discussing, you guys, it's the neurobiology of our emotions. It's not our psychology that's causing our problems. So every time that we have a trauma and re-traumatization, Dre, the re-traumatization is to our organs. That's the ones that are most heavily impacted. That's how come we have chronic illnesses. It's not the fact that it happens over and over and over again. The fact is that what it's doing is it's beating down our physiology. So as in actuality, anxiety and depression is because our chemicals are out of whack, our hormonal chemicals. It's those messengers, it's our physiology. In actuality, adverse anxiety and depression are actually part of our survival mechanisms to protect us from adversity, from trauma, from stress. And so we have an unconscious system that keeps us alive and that protects us in a survival brain. And so we have a reptilian brain, a mammalian brain, and we have a prefrontal cortex. But we have a survival brain, and the amygdala and the hippocampus and the thalamus and the HPA system are all act accordingly. So they're the ones that protect our bodies. Our cognition doesn't protect our bodies all the time because our cognitively, a lot of times we can't even see what's going on. If we could really see and register the impact of trauma on our bodies through the physiology of it, through the cortisol, through the adrenaline, that's the stuff that's causing our nervous system to be getting stuck in the on position. So when you keep secreting a cortisol and adrenaline on your HPA system, that's what compromises your health and compromises your body because it compromises your immune system. And so when we're not getting the appropriate healthcare information and they're not teaching us about our vagus nerve and how our vagus nerve actually sends 80% information from our bodies to our brain and our brain sends 20% information back down, then you need to ask yourself, what's the routes of transmission? The routes of transmission of communication with the brain and body comes through the hormones, it comes through pulse, it comes through electromagnetic, and it comes to the nervous system. And the carrier of this is actually our blood. And so when we're eating foods that have all these toxins in them, and we're eating foods that are not high in minerals, this augments our communication systems. That's the reason why so many people are coming down with all these chronic illnesses. And it's because that medical doctors don't have training in adverse childhood experiences, nor do they have training in the impact or the outcome of adverse childhood experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With that being said, me as a parent, describe some of the ways that the trauma that we experience on a everyday basis, how can we affect our children, specifically my 9-month-old and my 2-month-old, starting there, because they watch us. They watch our movements, they watch our actions, they watch how we behave, they watch how we respond to trauma. How are some of the ways in our Black households are we passing down that unsaid trauma to our children? And also, I'm not even going to go to three. I'm going to say two simple mechanisms that can be done as a Black parent every single day. Very simple mechanisms that we can work on with ourselves to change some of those ways we pass that trauma down to our children. Because no matter what you believe, if you've been under a rock the last 7 years, then that's on you. But you've seen the unarmed shooting of a black man, the unarmed shooting of a black woman, the unjust killing of a black child. And you've seen those images shown over and over and over and over again. You've watched Colin Kaepernick, stand up for those black children and those black lives and those people lost their lives unjustly, and watched his livelihood taken away from him for that same issue, and also further devaluing us as a society over and over and over. At what point do we say, wow, we're living in the stress, we're living in the trauma, we actually need to start preparing ourselves and coming up with counteractive measures that we work on every single day, and put the pride aside. That's why I'm here. Put the pride aside and say, I'm not perfect. I can be better. I can do more. So those are my two questions. What are some of the ways that we as parents simply just pass down our everyday trauma to our children? And what are some two simple starting mechanisms that we can start with ourselves, whether it be meditation, whether it be changing the way we eat, et cetera, that we can prevent that from happening in the future?
There's a plethora of things that we can do. But one of the first and most important things is to actually start focusing on trauma-informed care facilities. And when I say trauma-informed care shifts the conversation from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, and a primer for trauma-informed care has become a widely recognized paradigm for creating safe spaces for individuals who experience trauma and reducing the likelihood that accessing services would cause re-traumatization. So when you're at home with those children, you have to self-regulate your body better, meaning no emotional outbursts, and you also have to be more attentive to the child. And then also you need to pick up on some parenting skills, because the parenting skills that we picked up on actually was the parenting skills that was given to us by our peers, our forefathers and our ancestors, that was based on white body culture. And so you don't beat your kids to get them to mind. You love your kids to get them to mind. You communicate with your kids. So it's all about social engagement with your kids, and how you socially engage with your wife. How do you socially engage with yourself? So a lot of times when you wake up in the morning, some of the things that you might need to do is, first of all, meditate. And then really, before you even do the meditation, do a box breathing. And that's where you breathe, take a deep breath in, and then you count for 4, and then you blow it out through a straw, or blow it out slowly through your nose. You do that 4 times. And then you pick up something like, I brought some of my meditations in today so I can share them with you. Here's one that says, today's affirmation, looking toward what is good. I am a creative being. I have the power of reason, the ability to think, hope, and dream. I can envision my life not only as it is, but as I wish it to be. I can then think through the steps I might need to become more of who I am. I have the power to think my way into a happy point of view, to see the glass as either half full rather than half empty. My mind can be my greatest enemy or my greatest ally. It depends on how I choose to use it. That's just one of the affirmations that I use. And being that today is Martin Luther King Day, I picked up another one. He says, I'm not going to segregate my moral concerns. And we must know on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there's time when you must take a stand that's neither safe nor politic nor popular, but you must do it because it is right. Martin Luther King, 1976. So what I do is I read something empowering or motivating, something uplifting that's going to keep me positive. If I look at yesterday through today, then I'm going to be messed up. because everything yesterday was negative. And so that's a lot of us keep walking around here like this here, trying to see tomorrow through yesterday or today. And how can you do that and see it without being influenced? And so when we walk around, we carry this history with us, and it taps into our endocrine systems. And that's what pumps out the cortisol is long term, and adrenaline is short term. And that sits on top of your kidneys. And so if you don't understand the physiology of your body, then it's going to definitely impact your mental health. And so that's one of the things that the system already knows about this anxiety and depression. They know that that's not really what's going on. And so we keep going to medical doctors and going to people that actually don't have our best interests in common. Because I was watching the news today, and it talks about how America always keeps itself involved in war. Not informing people about your health care is another way to become a cash crop for the country that we live in. And that's the reason why there's so much racism in healthcare. There's so much racism in criminal justice. And when you look at all healthcare, our healthcare has caused us to be involved in the criminal justice system. Our educational systems are not honest. They're not truthworthy, because they're not depicting historical information in its proper context. And then that impacts us at financial institutions. So we've been a cash crop for America. Everybody that's not only in the BIPOC community, but immigrants who've come over, and we've been oppressed through the three realms of ACEs. And so when you look at those three realms of ACEs, and you look at the environment and the community, you're not getting jobs. We're eating toxins every day. They're feeding it in the food. They're using it as fertilizer. They're compromising our bodies. And so that's the reason why there's two different approaches in mental and behavioral health now. They have a bottom-up approach, and that's for individuals who have chronic illnesses. And then they have a top-down approach, and that's for individuals who they say have mental illness, but they don't have mental illness. They have a problem. Their physiology is with their homeostasis. Their bodies are not balanced.
Absolutely. Education is directly affected to health. Lack thereof will cause health problems. With that being said, with the tactics that we've discussed, if I want to talk about, because it's one thing to say, hey, fix yourself, clean your house, but I want to know exactly what you are doing, on a scientific level, what you are actually doing to your children when you don't take heed and you don't, practice, self-care, and make sure that the living environment, the environment around your kids that you're creating is also conducive to how you're raising them as well. How does trauma affect the minds of our children, on that level?
They're scared all the time. They're scared and frightened. And so they can't make sense out of somebody else who's scared or frightened. And they can't make sense out of somebody that they see drunk, hollering and screaming at their mom. They can't make sense out of something when they see you socking their mom upside their head, or throwing all the food and clowning and stuff. They can't make sense out of it. So all the time, they're already in that parasympathetic. They're in fight or flight.
Yeah.
They're in fight or flight, so it's hard for them. So first of all, they need to be in a safe environment. So when you still have that residual effect of the drama or the trauma that happened in the room, and then you've never deregulated them from that traumatic experience, then it just stacks up on top of each other. So one of the things you can do is everything that happens with that child, you need to sit down and explain it to them like you talking to Ray Pookie or Shaniqua. You know what I mean? And they're gonna jump on you, and they're gonna jump on you if you ain't telling the truth. And so the best thing to do in a program of this nature, here's the reason why I like trauma-informed care, is you're gonna win as long as you're honest.
Absolutely.
As long as you're honest. And so that's the only thing that I ask. I don't ask individuals when they come see me for therapy, because I don't do therapy. I do psychoeducation, and then you need to make the choices, because me trying to tell a grown man to go this way and do that, or, it's like talking to an elephant or talking to a tree, you know what I mean? And so you need to figure out that these consequences are tough enough on you so that you want to make a change. It's the same reason why that I went to a behavior modification treatment center. I swallowed a quarter ounce of crack cocaine and I died and was paralyzed. And so, a small voice inside me said, you should probably go. And so I noticed that every time I didn't listen to that small voice, I ended with a bigger stick upside my head. So I listened to that small voice, and it was a 9-month program. And after the 9 months, I told him, man, you got another program? I'm not leaving. I was scared to leave with me.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is if we're not dealing with our own personal everyday trauma, we have the ability to affect our children's emotional dysregulation.
Everybody around you.
Everything. We have the ability to cause numbing within our children. They may not, accept emotions the way that they're supposed to. We do have the ability to alter that. We also have the ability to cause triggers and flashbacks within our children. With trauma that they didn't even experience. I mean, the emotional and brutal trauma of slavery has, believe it or not, been passed down generation to generation, which is why a lot of us got whoopings when we were kids.
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics is in the environment, you know what I mean? And so, and that's what we have to really start looking at. It's our environment that's causing the experiences, and the fact that our parents don't have the resources to nurture us. And so we're living in a false reality. Here we was the slaves, and we created all the wealth, but they've never allowed us to pass on any wealth. And so it's the same thing like we talked about last week when I said 66% in the state of Washington don't even pass on any wealth. So how is that looked in all this white body culture has all the wealth and we have none, and they've given us an ideology and a culture that's not beneficial to our community because the body holds the score. The body knows the score. And so that's the reason why the children are getting worse, because our personal environments are getting worse. And that's that institutional racism. And that's the reason why we have to take and start looking at the environments that we are creating for all people, and how it's impacting our organisms, our bodies. And then we'll stop having all these chronic illness, and we'll stop having these behavioral health problems, and we'll stop having these pipeline to prison programs.
Absolutely. Let's transition to how we've covered the mind of how trauma affects that of ourselves and how we pass that, make that transition to our children. Let's move into the body.
So with the body, that's a real deep subject when we're talking about the anatomy, because when you're talking about change, you really need to talk about the nervous system and the central nervous system first, and break down the autonomic nervous system, the central nervous system, your parasympathetic, your sympathetic, your dorsal vagal, your ventral vagal, your HPA, your hippocampus, your thalamus, your amygdala. I think that we should touch on this next week and actuality to make this succinct and complete, because I have some material on it, but it's educational material.
Absolutely.
And I think that we need to continue this because they go side by side. That's the reason why I have 165 different brain changing tips and tools and handouts on trauma and to how to change their brain and transform their lives. And we need to actually start referring some individuals to some books and some ebooks that I have as resources. And also, too, anybody out there in the community who's seeking any type of information for healing or health and wellness, they should send us questions during the chats and during the shows that we have, because this needs to be a lot more therapeutic than what it is. And we actually are trying to set up the foundation here that we are a trauma-informed care agency, and we're not looking to re-traumatize people at the League of Extraordinary People, but have a safe place so we can discuss what's going on in your life, so we can take an assessment and look at areas so we can help improve your physiology so you're not experiencing any more anxiety, depression, or being in and out of your window of tolerance. And so we would look at you from a physical level so we can do a whole body focus intervention of education, because there's no sense in going to treatment anymore, you guys. It's not about treatment, because we just never got the basic information. So stop beating yourself up in the middle of the ring by yourself about your anxiety and depression and stuff, and come join the League of Extraordinary People so you can find out through an educational model, a psychoeducational model, all the various things and questions that Dre was asking. Of course, there's answers, and I have answers to all that, but we're getting out of sync with the way we're presenting this material. So anybody who's really interested on how to actually have some answers to understand better about how their interactions with their children, then send us an email and I'll send you an ebook so you can understand it. But Dre, I'd like to send that topic for another night, because there's a lot of things that's involved in that. I can tell you this, that physical separations, cesarean sections, infections, or illnesses with the mother, incubator care, miscarriages. There's just a plethora of things that can go wrong in a child's life and in a child's home, and especially when it comes to teaching them how to co-regulate their children so they can regulate themselves. That's the reason why there's so many angry youth, because they was never taught how to self-regulate, and so they couldn't calm themselves, so they stayed up in fight or flight. You know, it's almost like when a kid starts crying or something, they're in fight or flight, you know, so they can't make reason of anything. And so if we don't teach individuals how to calm themselves down through conversation, it's the same reason why you have arguments with with our wives, or you have arguments with your husband. It's because the communication is not there. You're not looking them in the eyes, and you're not being honest. It's just real simple. We can solve our problems here in America if we express more love than hate, and we help self-soothe. So actually, with the children, they need more love.
Absolutely.
With the adults, they need more love. And so we need to start looking at the policies and the environment that's causing the low wages, because the same thing that happened in the 1918 Spanish flu aftermath is happening right now. And you can see that if you look at the first volume of Howard Zinn's movie on the People's History of the United States. And so if you look at that, you'll see the same thing. They was demonstrating that it all had to do with wages. Same thing is going on now. We're not having livable wages. So without livable wages, we're not eating livable food. The food is no good. The health care is no good, because it's biased. It's based off a culture that's false. The American dream is falling apart because one culture wants to be greedy.
Absolutely. And what I appreciate about the League of Extraordinary People is the fact that you're providing a safe space for minorities to come and be represented when it comes to, you know, being an advocate for their own healthcare, being an advocate for their own mental health, you know, and being a resource. Really, it should be used as a preparation tactic or tool before you enter, you know, the health world and go talk to a million doctors. At least you have somebody that's going to represent you from a culture perspective when it comes to your health care. And that's really important for minorities to understand, that, you know, you cannot be graded on the curve with the rest of society when we know for a fact we start our lives with underlying conditions that are passed down generationally. With that being said, I want to thank Mr. White for being here. Go ahead one more time before we get out of here. Shout out your social media handles. Tell everybody where they can find you at.
At tleop.org, tleop.org, the League of Extraordinary People.org, or tleop.org. In closing, can I say one thing, man? I got something highlighted here that I would like to share.
Absolutely.
It says many people think that if a parent is in therapy, that their therapist is talking about trauma and ACEs. So why don't we do it on a home visit if we know the parent is in counseling for depression, PTSD, etc.? True, a therapist is hopefully addressing trauma, but these conversations are often limited to the very old specific events that a client brings up on their own. Even though it's now 20 years old, and that's ACEs research, is not required topic for many graduate programs. They say I can count on one hand the number of therapists that I know who talk about adverse childhood experiences study. In my own experience of receiving therapy, not one therapist ever talked to me about ACEs or neuroscience. Neuroscience means neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resiliencies. The answer, they said, if you're not sure, okay, hold on. Home visitors cannot assume that these pivotal conversations are happening. If you're not sure, an easy way to find out is to simply ask, have you ever heard of an adverse childhood experiences study? The answer will guide the rest of your conversation, early childhood mental health therapist. So if your healthcare doctor doesn't know about adverse childhood experiences or the impact of the chronic illnesses from adverse childhood experiences, then chances are you're in the wrong room. So, and if you're the smartest guy in the room, then chances are you need to leave that room. So that's something that Dre did, and something that I did when it came down to my liver transplant issues. When they told me this, I changed rooms. I went to Swedish Hospital. I went to a room that could talk to me. When you start talking to healthcare providers and they're still medically taught and they're not looking at science, and when you go to buy a new car, you don't buy the old car, you buy the new car. The reason why you buy the new car is because of science. So if you're looking to heal from a chronic illness, from addiction, from anxiety or depression, you need to start looking at science so you can create a healing program. And because that's going to come on a continuum. Medical doctors are just there to treat the symptoms. They just want your money, honey.
Absolutely. We'll save that for a later episode. I definitely want to get into the business of healthcare too, because that's another avenue that we need to definitely take accountability over as well. I can tell you a story about when I was actually getting my transplant, when I went to, I'm not going to say that hospital's name, but I actually had an investor approach me and tell me flat out, you know what? I really like what you're doing. I'll pay for your transplant flat out. Just offered to pay for it. Of course, that's great news. I was ecstatic. Like, really? Like, you'll really do that? And he was like, yeah, just go to the hospital, figure out what we need to do, the paperwork that needs to be signed, whatever we have to do, figure it out, and I'll take care of it. I went to that hospital, and when I mentioned that I had basically a donator for the funds to cover the transplant, I had never heard so many people in one room do backflips and give excuses and tell me why that wasn't a good idea. And just, I never heard a hospital in my life say they don't want money. Why is that? It's because I believe they truly prey on veterans like myself who have certain insurances that will get everybody's cut on the way up to the top. When you just hand somebody a check, those people in that middle don't get money. And I think that's an issue that's going on within our medical world that needs to be addressed, because I had never seen that before. I had somebody that was willing to donate the money, pay the whole thing, and had a hospital tell me, no, we're not going to do it like that.
There's a whole lot of organizations that's doing payola, and that's the same thing with the criminal justice system, the education system, the finance system, and our healthcare system. The League of Extraordinary People was created so that people of color and people who are of any color can get enough information so they can take care of their own bodies through understanding what their anatomy is about. In actuality, the reason why we have so many mental health and behavioral health challenges is because we never told anybody the truthful information. It's the same thing that they're fighting with the politics today. The original sin is slavery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that being said, I can't wait for next week. Thank you, Federal Way Black Collective, for establishing this platform for Mr. White and myself to fellowship and share health journeys and information and education through culture. Appreciate you joining us here today, and we are out of here.
Thank you.